in the UK. So I knew everybody.
Mm.
Who was
So
everybody in the early days.
Yeah, and you had PAS 55.
Yes, well,
As a
funnily enough,
driver.
well, we didn't, of course. The person who came up to me at the conference was a man who worked for what's now AECOM, but at the time was something called Oscar
Okay.
Faber.
Yeah.
And they got bought by somebody,
Yeah.
etc. And he was a very interesting character, and he had this vision, again, really about using information and modelling to support decisions in sewerage and water and then in rail. And he had heard of asset management from somewhere. I don't know really where he got it from. But he was then really very keen in encouraging people into asset management. And it was David Ford who had the idea for a standard. So it was, and this must have been 2001, 2002. He had the idea for a national standard and really did the running. He was not a front man. He wasn't he didn't stand up on etc. and on stage and talk about it, but he organised, and including a British Standards Institute to do it, I guess, to coordinate it. So PAS 55, I knew I was in there right at the beginning when David Ford first had the idea of doing it. I wasn't on the technical committee because it's not technical committee is not my thing, really. Yeah. But I was responsible at the Institute of Asset Management for launching PAS 55 in 2004. And David had the idea that having a national standard on asset management, I mean, literally, he said, if we have a standard, you can point to it. You can say, look, asset management is a real thing. Yeah. It has a BSI standard. He was absolutely right. And I remember him saying to me, at one point, I don't really care what's in it. It's the fact that it's a standard on asset management. It's not banned PAS 55 at all, actually. Yeah. It's got a couple of funny biases.
Yeah, I know there was. Yeah, I know the background behind that, and because I don't know whether you know Tom Carpenter in Australia.
No.
Yeah, well, he was on the big committee that ended up developing the standard, where you have people from every country.
Oh, ISO 55,000.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, the ISO 55,000. And so I know the history behind the relationship there and all that.
Yeah, and ISO 55,000, we thought that it wasn't quite as good as PAS 55. But of course, the real point about ISO 55,000 was it's international.
Yes.
And it had reps from 29 different countries on, you think it has reps from 29 countries, and there aren't 29 countries in the world that do asset management. No. So it was actually quite a milestone that people could come up with a consensus, even if there are one or two odd things in it. But it was an achievement, and then, of course, that's tremendously late too. ISO 55,000 didn't come out till 2014.
Yeah, I know.
And yet it feels like it's been around forever now. But yeah, and it was a milestone, and it was important for bringing more countries in.
It was extremely important because, as you say, you could touch it, you could feel it. And then there was a recognition that asset management was a real thing. Whereas,
it was a real thing.
Bang your head against a brick wall talking to some of the clients and that, because they didn't understand what it was. Even after you spoke to them, they didn't understand it, and they didn't think it was real anyway. Yeah. And then when the standard comes along, well, you got to align yourself with it and all the rest of it. And they sat up and paid attention, which meant the selling of it was a lot easier.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I remember that in the first few years when I was interested in asset management, starting in about 1998, that you spent all your time explaining what asset management was to people, and that could be a bit tedious. Yeah. But actually, it wasn't PAS 55 that started to make the difference for us. David Ford went on a visit. His company paid for him to go to New Zealand and Australia, and where he met everybody. And he came back with two things. One, raving about Penny and her strategic asset management newsletter. He said, we don't have to worry about doing a newsletter. We've already got it. Can't be any better than Penny's. But the other thing was he brought back the International Infrastructure Management Manual, which of course was very high production value. and was fairly hefty even in
Yeah.
those days.
It was.
And you could really wave that around.
Mm.
So for David, actually, the IIMM, which was just about the same time as we were thinking about PAS 55, was the first thing, and it had a glossary in it.
Mm.
It's amazing to think that made such a difference, where we could go, no, look, here's the definition in the IIMM of everything.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of it for us.
It was a big
to
effort.
actually make it a thing.
Yeah, it was a big effort because Roger was involved, I was involved, and there was a number of people in our group involved, and there was also the New Zealand people involved as well. And it was a big effort to pull all the information together to produce this thing. And
Absolutely.
one of the people in New Zealand was involved in working with NAMS at the time, New Zealand Asset Management, to pull it together. And that was an amazing job. What they had to do to actually pull it together, an amazing job. And it's metabolized.
When did the first issue of that? I mean, I know that it developed out of work that Roger had done earlier for New South Wales.
Yeah.
But at some point before I'm around, it becomes the IIMM. But I don't think I've ever known what year the first volume of IIMM came out.
I think it was about 97.
Yeah, okay, that makes perfect sense.
There was the New Zealand manual, which we wrote, which was earlier. That was, I'd say about 95, 96. And then there was, what first came out was the Australian, they called it the Asset Management Guidelines, but it was actually the Asset Valuation Guidelines. The government produced that. And then there was the international, sorry, not the international, it was the Maintenance Manual that was produced here as well. And so,
how interesting.
Yeah, and then it was a case of, once we did the New Zealand one, that came next. And then we said, well, instead of renewing the New Zealand one, why don't we pull everything together and call it the International Manual and give it substance globally? And that's what happened.
And it was very impressive. As I said, it was very high production values, as well as being based on. I got involved in an edition which must have been about maybe edition 3, which wanted international case studies.
Yes.
So we did a UK version, not really very UKized, but was quite fun. But it was an impressive. It's really, in a way, never been rivaled. I'm a great fan of IPWEA. And their publications and what they do. I still think they're ahead of the game anyway.
They've done a lot of work.
There's some quite nice things in Canada where they have a very strong asset management in municipalities.
Yes.
So there's quite a lot of resources for cities.
The one thing I like about Canada is they've actually the councils are spending a lot of money in asset management.
They are, they take
and they're moving forward quite rapidly.
And that was encouraged by Australia.
Yeah.
The first, I know a little bit, I'm interested in history. So I think the first connection between Australia and Canada on asset management was probably into British Columbia and something called Asset Management British Columbia, Wally Wells, etc.
Yeah.
That was definitely through an Australian. And then Penny worked with people in Ontario cities. And of course, Ontario now, they legally have to do asset management, a city or a county. And that's, of course, pushed it even. So there's some impressive stuff in Canada. I don't think anybody else, Britain, for example, is, and US, nothing like it, and the cities.
Enjoyed this video? Press the like button and subscribe. If you'd like to see more, please click on the Patreon link below and sign up.